Hi everyone, I'm Melissa Reader, the CEO of Violet, and today in Conversations That Count, I am having a chat with a wonderful woman called Mitch Gibson. Mitch and I have known each other for a couple of years now because Mitch joined us as a Violet Guide and has been doing countless hours of work with our organisation over the last few years, supporting other people as they go through the journey of caring for loved ones at the last stage of life. So it's going to be a beautiful conversation. I hope you're comfortable. Get a cuppa, get a coffee, whatever your preferred beverage in is, and let's lean in. So hi, Mitch.
Hi,
Really lovely to
Melissa.
have you here
It's actually really
today.
lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's so nice to have a conversation with someone who has, been through this in terms of their life experience, but then has been on the Violet journey with us as well. So
Mm,
thank you for giving me some time. Um,
pleasure.
let's get started by talking a little bit about, your life, your experiences. What brought you here to work with Violet? What would be the story?
There's always a story, isn't there?
Isn't there?
Oh, yeah. Violet first came onto my radar during the first year after my life partner, Mark, died. And I was, of course, in that first year of grief. You can't not be struggling. And the thing I was struggling with that I never expected to be a part of losing your loved one was complete loss of identity and purpose. And I saw an ad on Facebook advertising for Violet guides, and I thought, what's Violet? So I had a little look and a snoop at the website. I thought, well, that looks a bit good. And then they were talking about people that had lived experience were only the ones that were accepted as guides. And I'd only just decided to begin studying to become a counsellor, and my intention was to work with grief and bereavement and caring for carers because of my lived experience. And that's pretty
Mm.
much what Violet was all about. And I'm like, this is a bit too good to be true. So I applied, and here I am 2 years later having a chat with you.
I love that. Love that. I,
Yeah.
I just wish we could have reached you and, maybe a year or two earlier as you
Oh,
were caring for Mark.
you know what?
That's
It wasn't just Mark. I've been caring for my parents now for 10 years, and I had to put them on hold when Mark was ill. So I've got a bit of caring mileage under my belt. But yes, I
mm,
would have loved Violet during the last 10 years at least.
yeah, yeah.
The other guides that I've met, my colleagues who also have experience with this work, I hold them in such high regard. They have such There's this wellspring of knowledge and wisdom and empathy and care factor and all of the things that are so important while you're drowning in this horrible experience of caring
Yeah.
and grieving. So there's something about lived experience that can't be taught at university. You can have the most decorated, scholastic genii that have never experienced death or have
You
never
know
cared
that
for
that's
someone they
so
love. And it's
interesting
like,
that you bring that up because when we were setting up Violet and thinking about this concept of a Violet guide, we did a little bit of light touch research, and one of the things that came back really consistently was, I love my GP. I could go and talk with my GP, but if they haven't walked this path, if they don't know what these shoes are like, that's actually not the person that I want to support me. I need to talk to someone who has been through this.
I,
So, yeah,
I
it's really
totally
true,
get
isn't
it.
it?
It is true. And I
Mm,
remember I had a lovely, lovely GP. I really, really, really liked him. And he came out with one of those classic clangers that is with the best of intention, but the dialogue landed so badly. And this is when Mark was probably about 6 months away from dying. He said to me, and I quote, "You know, 56 is a good age. You'll meet someone else." It's like, dude, he's not even dead yet. So it's like you just don't. He's never experienced this. So he said that with the best of intentions, but it was in that moment that I realized that the value of lived experience in terms of offering empathetic counsel, and that's been that's been sort of pulling me forward anytime where I feel like, I don't want to do my study today, but it's like, you need to do this, you need to do
mm.
this. Um, because there's not enough people that get this stuff out there. Yeah,
I know. Well, that's our whole kind of mission and purpose, isn't it?
pretty
So
much. Yeah.
we're so grateful, Mitch, to have you joining us.
Oh,
And, you know, are you happy to talk a little bit to me? Because we've never really talked about your experience with Mark, and you've also mentioned your parents.
oh yeah.
Tell us the Mitch life story. Let bring me into the tent.
Okay. I met my partner Mark when I was almost 40. So we'd both had partners and we'd both done that, and we met each other the week before I turned 40. And so it was like, huh. And we had a relationship that lasted almost 17 years, and he was my person. It wasn't an easy relationship. I don't know if any relationships are easy, but it's, when you have two grown up, independent, wildly opinionated people in the same relationship, yeah, it can get bumpy, but it that was the deepest deep love I've ever experienced, and
Oh
he was
gosh.
my person. And we bumbled along and we got through it and we kept going through it, and it was just, he was my person. He could always just make me feel better when things weren't great in
Mm.
life. My business for most of my journey with Mark was, I had a yoga studio. I was a yoga teacher, and that was all very good. And gosh, 10 years after I met Mark, both of my parents simultaneously physically fell to bits at the exact same time. And so I was
What
managing
happened? What
well,
happened to your parents?
long story short, my mum rolled over one morning in excruciating pain. Turns out she'd bulged a disc onto a nerve.
Oh,
And about a month later, she required surgery on that. She had to get, laminectomy and pull out the disc, put in some
oh
screws and some
gosh.
metal. And at the exact same time, my dad was diagnosed with a really aggressive melanoma on his forehead. And so he had to have radiation therapy. So I've got this photo of the two of them. Mum's just come out of the operating room. So she's out of it, and my dad's beside the bed. He's got this crimson face with bandages all over it from the radiation, and he's holding her hand by her
Oh,
bedside. And I'm just like, this was exactly what it was like. They both felt to bits seriously at the same time. And
how old were they, Mitch, when that all happened?
they were both 79, turning 80 that year.
Right,
And
right.
it's
Gosh.
just that decade of 80s.
Yeah.
It's
Do you have
just,
other brothers and sisters?
I do have two siblings, and I have to factor in that I have a different relationship to my mum, particularly, than they do. And
Yeah.
they were completely hands off and have been the whole time, pretty much.
Ah, are you the
So,
eldest?
no, I'm the youngest.
Oh, okay. You're the
Mm,
baby in the family.
yeah, right.
But
So
you've been managing the majority of that caring role by the sounds
I
of
did. I
things.
cared for mum and dad for, gosh, 6 years. Mum was in hospital that first year for 10 months. There was a lot going on for her. She ended up having a stroke that year. Dad survived pretty well. Mum had a stroke. Anyway, we finally got her home toward the end of that year. And it was just all go, home care packages and managing
Yeah.
them and working with the ACAT supervisors and changing the house around to make it, mobile friendly for mum, and just being there to help them through this. It was a massive shell shock for both of them. And I'm sort of juggling my business in this hand and I'm
Yeah.
juggling them in that
Classic
hand. Oh my
sandwich
God.
generation
Oh,
scenario that you're describing there.
yeah, right. And it
Mm.
just, you go from one level of absolute exhaustion to somehow another level to somehow another level, and you just are completely at capacity. So the tiniest little thing will tip you over, health wise, mental health wise, whatever. So anyway, we're sort of trucking along, and Dad starts showing signs of dementia. And it turns out that the aggressive radiation he'd had on his forehead had basically cooked a part of his brain. The geriatricians couldn't
Oh
figure out
gosh.
any other reason for it. No bloods, no genetic history, no nothing. And they said, you know what, that radiation, I think they made a fried part of his brain, and they wouldn't have mentioned it because if he hadn't have had the treatment, he would have died from melanoma. So it's sort of like,
Yeah,
is it the chicken or the
that's a
egg?
no-win situation, isn't
Pretty
it?
much. But, there we were with Dad starting to cognitively decline, Mum still very high needs. They were both on level 4 packages and needing them. And it just became it was just starting to tip into unmanageable at home when out of nowhere, Mark, my partner, began experiencing a bit of niggly back pain. And he was kind of, he used to go to the gym and he used to manage himself okay. We all like the indulgent things in life every now and again. But he couldn't sort of get around this pain. I said, why don't you just go to the doctor and get it checked out? So he did, and they sent him for a scan, and they said, oh, there's some spots we've seen on your liver. We're going to have to biopsy that. And I'm like, what? And anyway, long story short, October of 2018, he was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer.
Oh,
And
Mitch.
it was like life was already like so close to capacity, like at capacity, teetering on capacity. And then we get this diagnosis thrown in. And so life as I knew it went like tip and then shake. And it didn't stop shaking until after he died. So I think in the first year I called one of my sisters and I said, I can't do Mum and Dad anymore. I just can't. And she said, that's okay. I'll take over the admin kind of stuff. And Mum and Dad knew what had happened. Of course, they didn't expect me to show up the way that I was. And for the first year of Mark's diagnosis, he's a very independent guy. We both are very independent people. And he was, how can I say this? He was determined, we were both determined that he was going to be in that tiny little survivor group, that 5% that live for 5 years. I need to know what they're taking and what they're doing. We need to be in that group. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. All that sort of positive hope stuff. Hope is such a powerful driver.
Yeah.
And
so necessary.
oh my
So
God.
necessary when you're trying to grapple in that fog, that kind of post-diagnosis. You got to have a lifeline.
You've got to have a lifeline. It takes a while to learn the new landscape. Like pancreatic is a complicated disease, which is why nobody's figured out the complicated cure yet, so they say. But for that first year, he was absolutely determined to the point of being stubborn of, this is not going to affect us. We're just going to carry on regardless. I'm on a trial. My scans are stable. I'm fine. And you need to pretend like it's fine too. And I'm like, but it's not. It's not fine at all. Yeah. So it was a really, really difficult year for me to play this game of, for want of a different word in this context, I'm dying on the inside and I'm just having to carry on. And that was the year that I realised that my business wasn't working. My little yoga studio in suburban Sydney, when I began back in 2005, I was one of 2 yoga providers in the suburb. And by that stage, I was one of 8. And
oh gosh,
it's just like, okay. And
that's so tough. My gosh, this all happened at the same time.
All at the same time. Gosh. And there's moments where you think you're losing it, and then you dial that up even further, and you think, okay, this time I'm really losing it, and it keeps on dialing up, and it keeps on dialing up, and you're just sort of like, it was nuts. The concept of plate spinning, every single plate was teetering to the point of falling, and I was just madly spinning these crazy life-dependent plates. And anyway, I sold my yoga school at the end of 2019. It was a blessing to get rid of it in the end.
Especially just as we were going into the pandemic.
Hello, that's the thing. No one saw COVID around the corner. So the timing for that, thank God, was perfect. But just as I sold my studio, Mark had been doing remarkably well up until about a month later after I sold my studio. His condition declined quite rapidly and dramatically. And it was at the exact same time that COVID started, that lockdowns were a thing, that
So
we
we're
were
talking
all
like
working.
February, March 2020, I'm guessing, by this
Correct,
stage.
correct.
And
And
what happened? What were the signs that things were declining for him?
he had new pain in other places. His
Yeah.
pain was woefully, all of a sudden, it was unmanaged. And yeah, he was still working. He insisted on still working, just being normal. Let's just be normal.
Yeah.
And I was really worried about him. So he was due for a scan anytime you're in treatment. He was on chemo the whole time.
Yeah.
This is happening. So the 8 weekly scans, and the people that are listening to this understand the cycle of scanning and results,
Yeah.
and the eight
Oh,
weekly
God.
scanxiety. It's just stratospheric.
Oh, I've never heard that term before, but that's
Oh
so,
my
I mean, you're
God.
literally stricken
You're
with panic
absolutely, and
between the
so,
moment you go in and they have those tests run, and then you're
yep.
just sitting in
And
this
those two
kind of
days where
zombie
they take to
state,
get the
right?
results
Yeah.
back, and it's just, there's such an edge at home. Everyone's
Yeah.
snappy. Everyone, it's like full moon, super moon every night. Everyone's edgy. Everyone's snappy. And then it's like, okay, result. And the result was bad. We have new metastases on another part of his body. And we're like, oh, shit. And it kind of just didn't stop deteriorating from then.
Right.
He was very sick, and the escalation of his illness and of the meds he required, and they weren't small meds. We're not talking Panadol here. We're talking
No.
morphine and methadone
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
hydromorph and serious high-end opiates. And the quantity, and I was just like, this is surreal. This is honestly surreal. This can't be happening, but it is, and it definitely is. And it just was, you just, this is the worst scenario it could possibly be, because we were still like, yeah, you're going to do okay, we're going to be okay, we're going to be in that 5% group. And it just kept going from bad to worse.
Were
Mark
the
ended up on,
doctors having any kind of, option B conversations with you at that stage?
from day one,
Right.
this will kill you. Chemo might buy you a bit of time. If you
Right.
land on the right clinical trial, then maybe. But the only thing definite was, this will kill you. And now that we know what we know about the chemotherapy regime for pancreatic, it's like, if the disease doesn't kill you, the drugs
The
will.
chemo will,
Oh
because it's so
God,
tough, isn't it? It's
it's
such a,
brutal.
yeah.
It's literally a toxic shitstorm. And it was alarming watching that process with this man that I loved, and watching him turn into a very beaten man version of that previous guy he was. He was a 54-year-old producer. He was smart and funny and gorgeous and stylish and all of those things. And it's still surreal to think of what he went through.
Mm.
And yeah, it, all of the memories are still like burned. They're tattooed all over me. Not in reality, but they're tattooed all over
Oh, I
all
understand. I
of it. And
understand.
yeah, so anyway, Mark um, did continue to decline. And it was, through 2020 with COVID, it was so surreal. Like, and that there was such an edge at the hospital during
So
2020.
you're in Sydney, right? And you're getting
I am in
treatment in one of
Sydney.
the Sydney hospitals, but you're
Yeah.
managing all the restricted visitation and all the
Yep.
complexities
All of
of the
that.
pandemic.
Yeah. And
Oh
the thing
gosh.
about when the pandemic was new is, and you may remember this, nobody knew, like nobody really knew how bad it was. Like
Or
we,
how long, or was
yeah,
it, how bad is this going to get, and how long is it going to go on
exactly.
for?
There
Nobody
was so
knew.
much uncertainty. I remember coming
Mm.
home from the hospital after a day. Mark was admitted for a whole lot of time in 2020. So visiting the hospital, like QR codes and check-ins and
Mm.
mask wearing and social distancing and sanitizer, all of those new rules. And people that are already at capacity living in the world of cancer treatment, even the queue to get in at Chris O'Brien Lifehouse, people would just shove in front of the line. And, it's like, and they had guys on the desk saying, hey, mate, you've got to check in, you've got to put your mask on and pull your mask up over your nose. It's like, get a clue, will you?
Everyone's at the edge of what they can deal with,
Everyone,
aren't
yeah,
they,
but
in
I
a
know,
situation like that?
of course, but our people, our person, Mark, and all the other patients there for treatment, they were all immune compromised. And so if they caught COVID, I wouldn't be able to be with him. I wouldn't be allowed to see him. So we had to be so careful. Like, I remember coming home from the hospital one day and I washed my shoes because I just didn't know.
Hypervigilance. I mean,
Uh-huh.
that's you have to lean into that in those
Uh-huh.
circumstances. And I think, again, just to your
Exactly.
comment around, none of us knew in those early
We
months when
didn't
you're
know.
carrying the extra responsibility of a partner who is so immunocompromised.
Yep. And
That makes every bit
yeah,
of sense, Mitch. Every bit of
100%.
sense.
It was scary. So
Mm,
anyway, he was put on a trial that was disastrous, and it made him so sick. And we had a lot of long admissions during that time. And we sort of started begging them to take him off the trial. And then
right.
finally, one of the scans said, "Oh, well, there's another new spot in a different part of your body now." And it was like,
Oh, God. Where had it spread
okay.
to?
Well, from his initial diagnosis of pancreatic with liver mets, it had initially gone to peritoneum, and then the last met spread was on his lung.
Oh, right.
And we were just like, okay. So off the trial, he was better, but we knew like his levels were really high. His liver levels were way high. And so we started really I was kind of full time researching as well, which was very interesting. And it's part of the reason I'm with Violet, because I had complete strangers from opposite ends of the globe. This is all on social media. Um, reach out to me, and I could see that these are the shonksters that are selling snake oil. These are the people that honestly are going beyond what the thing about the clinical trial world is. I understand the concept of clinical trials, but when you're told that you'll die in 6 months, you don't have time for a clinical trial. You have to just say, okay, that makes sense on paper, let's try that.
Yeah.
So these people, these kind, ridiculously smart people from other ends of the globe, literally took my hand and said, okay, here's what you need to know. Here's what you need to do. Here's what you should be taking. Here's the spreadsheet. I'll show you how to do it. And I spent hours and hours because COVID, no one was working. My job became redundant during COVID. And so I became full-time researcher and his carer at the same time. Like, he spent most of the day in bed. And I I learned stuff that I never thought possible. I don't have a scientific cell in my entire body, but I was doing this complex scientific research, and I actually was understanding it because I had to.
Mm.
And
The odds were that high, right? You just
uh-huh,
have to kind of lean in, and
this is it.
even when you were talking about the volume and the complexity of all the meds that you were managing for Mark, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. He was at one point taking 90, I think it was 96 pills a day. That's not including liquid herbs. And
Wow.
we used to have to do his Webster packs every Sunday night, and the meds would change every week. And so everything was on spreadsheets. And so I would dread Sunday nights more than I dread scan days, because I was the one managing the meds at home. And it's like, yeah, I know the doctors are saying give him this, but these other protocols that we'd looked at. And it was mostly about blocking metabolic pathways and starving the cancer. That's all about metabolic pathways. So a bunch of supplements, and some of the supplements had to be paused on chemo day and some didn't. And so every single Sunday night, it was a different regime. And I've got photos of Mark and I, and we used to do it on the kitchen bench, and he'd help me. I'd be the one, okay, I've got the spreadsheet. I know the dosages. I know what we've got to do. We've just got to get them into the little packets. And we used to get through it, but it was such a stressful time. And it was, in hindsight, absurd. Like, I remember a friend came over and just watched us do it, and she's like, what on earth? I said, yeah, I know. It's ridiculous. And it
But
was
when
ridiculous.
you're in it, you
Oh,
just do the
just
task in
keep
front of
swimming.
you.
Just keep
Yeah,
swimming upstream.
yeah,
And you do it because you have to do it. Because if
of
I don't do
course.
this, he'll die sooner. And so, yeah, but toward the end of that year, one of the beautiful angels that had helped me from overseas, she warned me about a thing called hepatic encephalopathy, which is basically liver failure, because every single thing we take is processed through the liver. And she warned me because she knew of it, and she knew that Mark's liver levels were high. And yeah, he started to show early signs, like his cognitive function started really faltering toward the end of.
And that's an indication of that failure, is it? Right.
Yeah. And so we had a few short admissions toward the end of 2020. And I flagged it with one of the doctors, and I said, can you please check if hepatic encephalopathy is a thing? And he just looked at me and said, that's for people with liver failure. It's like, yes, I know. Look at his levels. And he's just like, no, he was very dismissive. And I, in hindsight, think it's probably because, dude, the guy's got pancreatic cancer. He's on his way down. I can't say it to you like that, but that's pretty much what's happening. And it's just, that people can't prick that balloon of hope for you. They have to let the balloon just go down by itself. But yeah, so it turns out that sometime in January 2021, we had that dreaded oncology meeting where he said, we've got no more options. It's like, okay. And it was really surreal because for the entire, at that stage, 27 months, it was, we're going to do this. We are absolutely going to do this. Yeah. To the point where we'd been out for another clinical trial out at some other hospital in Blacktown. And the young registrar came in to interview Mark. And he looked at Mark's chart and he said, wow, you're not supposed to be here. Like, as in, you should be dead by now. And I was just like, can you not say that out loud to him? And anyway, the conversation continued. And then the actual doctor came in, who was attached to the registrar, and said the exact same thing. I kid you not. Wow, you're not supposed to still be here. And I was like,
gosh.
I mean,
for all the very, very best intentions, sometimes there's a level of desensitization, isn't there? That is, it's really cruel when you're on the other side of the desk.
Yep.
I had some not the same, but some similar experience. So my heart is breaking a little bit for you as you describe that, because you're trying to protect Mark as well as get the information and what you're there for. You've got to play a really critical role.
I need his head to be in this. And it broke my heart because on the way home from the hospital in the car, we were both kind of quiet, just processing. There's always a lot of information in those trial initial meetings. And he came out with a doozy. He said, am I supposed to be dead? And I just went, oh, sweetie, no, God, no, God, no. We're going to do this. And I was still on that hope. We're going to do this. But in this little voice, am I supposed to be dead? It's like, and there are so many times I can remember where it's like the weight of this is too much for me to hold on my own emotionally. And I had really good support through the counselling service at Lifehouse.
Oh, good. Really I'm so pleased to hear that.
A great therapist. She got me, she put up with me and my need to control and my need to swear a lot and my need to just be me. And she was with me right until the end. But yeah, so slowly but surely, we ran out of options and we had a month to do all of the things that I tell my Violet clients to do. Like, you've got to have an advanced severity directive, you've got to have a will, you've got to have an enduro. We had none of that because he was going to be fine.
Yeah.
And it's like all of a sudden.
And that's the tension, because if you start to introduce those things, I often use the word betrayal. That's Hey, Mitch, can you just pull your phone a little bit closer to you, because it's a tiny bit muffled and I just want to get your voice. No, that's absolutely fine.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. That's better.
Okay.
Tell me, as you were going through this, I mean, so much of what you've described is incredibly hard, but what was the most challenging part of it?
The most challenging part, that's a loud. I would say the transition from we're going to do this to this isn't happening anymore. And it's the transition from anticipatory grief to I can already hear on the horizon the rumblings of the real grief, and I know it's coming for me, and it's coming for me hard. And I was bracing for impact while I was packing my love off to die. And
Gosh, you described that car journey, you know, where you said you were both sitting in silence, and I guess maybe you both kind of started to
I
feel
don't
and
know. You know what?
process that
We kind of
shift.
went, well, I wasn't there yet. I think that was a turning point for him. But I could also see cognitively he was starting to show a few cracks. And also his body had been through so much, Melissa. I can't even tell you. He was a big, tall, strong guy. And other than about 8 litres of ascites in his belly that they pulled out the week before he died, he was getting very, very slight. And just, yeah. And I could also tell by friends that hadn't seen him for a while because COVID. And when they were finally allowed to visit, you could visibly see their faces like,
Yeah.
God, look at you. Yeah. And because it's like when you get a haircut, you don't notice your own hair growing until someone says, "Oh, your hair's grown," because you see yourself every day. It was like that with me. It was normal, and I still thought he was beautiful and handsome and all the beautiful things. And it's now not until I'm almost 4 years since his death, and I've noticed it now. It's like how very, very sick he looked. But back then, it was just him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
But,
as you said, it's incremental. You're there every day for
uh-huh.
that decline, really, which is what it is. But
Yeah.
yeah, for
Every
people
day
who
and every
haven't seen him
night.
for months, or yeah, yeah,
Oh my God, just the amount of stuff that you do that you never thought you'd need to do, like, inserting your own subcut butterflies and drawing up hydromorph syringes every single night and getting up 3 times a night to inject him with morphine. Yeah, let's just do that. And people
gosh,
are like, wow, you look really tired. It's like,
are you kidding?
thanks for noticing. Do you want me to run through the list? No, I'm not even going to bother. I'm too tired. But it was the hardest thing I've ever done, and it was so purpose driven. And so, in answer to your question, I'll look back to it now. What's the worst part? It was that time when all of the work and all of the research and all of the hope and all of the everything was for nothing. I'm going to get a dead partner out of it. And I look down the tunnel of the future of my life without him, and none of it lit me up at all. Not even a flash, nothing. Yeah, it's a dark time. It's a really, really dark time. We don't have kids. We had 2 cats, thank God for them. But it was a really, really dark time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was a few of my friends who could see it, and my therapist who could see it. They asked me the questions, and I said, "I'm not suicidal. I don't have a plan." Well, I kind of did have a plan, but I'm not going to kill myself. But I certainly don't want to be here. I really don't. Yeah, that was back then. I'm good now, but back then it's like, I don't want this. I don't want this. Why would I? But yeah, it took a long time. Anyway, Mark really, really wanted to die at home, as most people do. And then, as most people who want to die at home, it becomes unmanageable. He's a guy who was almost 6'3". He had such swelling in his feet that he had trouble walking. So getting him to the toilet in the middle of the night, even his sister and I,
So difficult.
we couldn't manage it safely ourselves. And so
Did you have a lot of support coming into your home at that
we had
stage? Did you have palliative care coming
we
in?
had community
Yeah,
nurses
that's
pretty
good.
much coming in every day at that point, syringe driver changes. They'd do drop-offs of syringes and butterflies and all the, draw up needles and all that stuff would just be dumped on our doorstep every night. Friends were dropping food. Excuse me. Friends were dropping food. It was surreal. There was a full production. It was like an ant farm. There was a full production happening. People, his nearest and dearest were coming in to say their goodbyes. That was really hard because he was really struggling at that stage. And he would say to me, we need to like schedule these people because I can only do like an hour at a time. This is so hard for me. And of all the roles that I assumed during his illness, the one I never assumed was the door bitch at the nightclub. I never expected to be having to turn people away and say, yeah, no, we can't see you, because, and their perception of it was me just being mean. But I had Mark saying, I can't do this. I can't do this.
I mean, the weight of those
Yeah,
goodbyes
I know it.
for someone who's so sick and so
I know.
tired and unwell, but the emotional weight of
Yeah,
those,
it was
yeah,
huge.
I hear you. That's huge. You just have to door bitch
I
away
did. I
in
had
those
to, and
circumstances. Mm.
it was hard, but it was just part of the hardness of what that was. So anyway, when we realised he was going to have to go, I went out and found the right palliative care ward. We settled on Concord. It was lovely. Um, it had this is going to sound weird. It had a good vibe about it. It's a palliative care ward. Um, yeah, there were some really good people working there, and so I organised that. I organised a solicitor. We did wills and enduring guardians and power of attorney. We did all the legals. One weird morning, and it was just surreal. Like, Mark was so spacey and weird, and just, okay, where do I sign? And it's like, oh, darling, he was like half dead anyway. And then the community nurses, who were really lovely, and they had said, look, every day they'd say, look, it's tough. We can see it's tough on you. When you can make the call anytime you want, and we'll come the next morning and take him. And there was one night where it was just like, we can't do this anymore. So I made the call, and they said, okay, we'll be there at 11 a.m. tomorrow. And it was like, oh God, and it's just so surreal. That last night you sleep in your bed with your person and the cats, and it's the only thing I can describe it as. It's like it's not real. It's not real at all. And
Did Mark know that he was going into hospital the next
he did.
day? Oh
He did.
gosh. I mean, there's something beautiful that you both knew that was going to change, but oh my gosh, I can't imagine how hard that night would have
It was
been.
awful, but the
Mm.
whole week leading up to that was awful. But at least I managed to get a few things. I managed to get like a video love letter from him speaking to camera, which is
Oh,
my most treasured possession. I've played it maybe 6 or 7 million
oh,
times in the last 4 years. Yeah,
oh.
really special. And also just looking at him then, how sick he was, and listening to his voice. Back then it was normal, and I look at it and listen to it now, and it's heartbreaking how sick he was. He was dying, and it was there were things that I didn't expect, like, you know, when the ambulance guys come into your bedroom to load him onto the trolley to take him out and down the stairs and into the ambulance. That's the patient transport ambulance. And I'm like, oh God. And, he was sitting, I've still got this vision of him on the trolley, on the nature strip, while they sort of opened the back of the ambulance. And I'm just looking at him, and he's pretty much resigned. And I just was like, this is like a bad movie. And it's about me and him. Oh, great. I texted my neighbour and said, he's going now. Do you want to come say hello or goodbye? And she said, I can't. I'm crying too hard. She was looking out the window at the ambulance and at him. She said, I can't. I'm crying too much. And I kept trying to get the cats because, of course, when I rang them that morning and said, okay, today's the day, They said, we'll be there in 2 hours. So in 2 hours, I had to pack his bag and my bag and all of the meds and all of the spreadsheets and all of that. And the cats, as soon as the cats see the suitcase, they're like, pew. And
They
they
know something's
know they're
going
going to
on.
go on a holiday. And I was desperate to get the cats in so he could say goodbye. And as soon as I put one on his lap, they'd just be like, pew, I'm gone. And that was really sad for me because the cats were our kids. And yeah, they knew what was happening. They knew for ages what was happening. So anyway, I cried the whole way to Concord from my house in the back of the ambulance holding Mark's hand. And I just couldn't believe that this was happening. We worked so hard for this not to happen, and it was happening. And he was in a really calm space of resignation, and I wasn't. I was just like a deer in headlights, and I still didn't know what to expect. And of course, I was going to stay with him for every minute of the whole time at Concord in the palliative ward.
How long was he at Concord for, Mitch?
11 days. His body slowly started to shut down, and it was pretty classic. It was pretty textbook. And I think it's helpful to know that, that beautiful TED talk that Catherine Mannix has done about what happens. I think everyone who has a sick person, a very sick person in their world should be mandatory viewing, because it just takes that anxious, terrifying edge off, and to know that this is normal. He's not in pain. He's not drowning. This is normal.
There's nothing else that I could be doing or should be doing to make this any better or different.
Just love him. Just talk to him. Just stroke him.
Just love him and hold his hand and talk to him. Exactly. No, it's
But I do wish they made palliative care hospital beds bigger, like enough for you to comfortably crawl in and snuggle up with him. Because I tried that one night and I was so woefully uncomfortable at about 3 a.m. I was like, ow, I've got to get back onto that little couch thing. But I just wanted to be with him,
It's actually a really beautiful thought. It's a bit like in some of the birthing centres, they have double beds. So you can get in and all have a cuddle together.
Why can't we do that with our beautiful dying people? Because they want it too. Like they're mourning the loss of the closeness of, snuggling.
Yeah.
And I also, it also made me realize that, they say the last sense to go is hearing. I want to add touch to that. If you can feel a catheter going in, then you can feel touch. So, yeah, he had a kind of a classic wind down. And the last morning, the night before he died, he was Shane Stokes breathing all night, and I knew what was coming. And it's a hard sound to listen to, even though you know what's coming. And did
you have anyone there with you at that stage, or was it just you and Mark?
I absolutely did not want anyone. If anyone else was there, I would have asked them to leave. Nurses were coming and going, but that's helpful for me and him. But that it was even working as his carer in palliative care. The exhaustion is palpable. Because he'll wake up at whatever time he wakes up, and you're up and you're at him, and, you came in rock bottom exhausted anyway. But it's just surreal. So the morning of his death, his breathing was still sort of Shane Stokesy, and he looked, like he was almost dead anyway. And I just literally said, sweetie, this is silly. You should go. I'm going to be okay. It's okay. You should go, darling. And sometime about midday, about 3 or 4 nurses came in to reposition him. He had some pressure sores. They came in to reposition him and change the sheets, and he hated being repositioned. He'd call out, and that would just make me anxious. So I said, okay, would it be good time for me to go and have a shower? Because some days you don't get to shower. And they said, yeah, go shower. And so I did. And by the time I finished my shower, I quickly threw on some clothes and went out just to check on him. And they'd finished and he seemed settled. And there was one nurse there. And she said, do you have a hairbrush? Because Mike had hair kind of as long as mine is right now. I said, yeah. So she said, why don't you go brush his hair back? So I did. And he looked peaceful, he looked settled. And she looked at me and she said, his breathing's changed. I said, yeah, I just noticed. And she said, it's not going to be long now. I said, thank you. She said, I'll leave you to it. And so he seemed settled, just like he had done dozens of times before. I thought, I'll just go in and clean my teeth. And literally, this is no embellishment whatsoever. This is actually what happened. I'm in the middle of cleaning my teeth. I've got a mouthful of foam. I get this absolutely crystal clear message: go back into the room now. And I heard the message, and I even acknowledged the message. I said, I hear you. I'm just going to finish cleaning my teeth and then I'll go. The message responded back to me, no, go now. And I was like, put my toothbrush down, spat out the foam, wiped my mouth, walked back in there. Now, Mark had been non-verbal, non-kissing, non-anything for the last 3-4 days. I go back in there and he's kind of like he's looking for something. And I stroked his forehead and I said, are you okay, sweetie? And he reached up and he kissed me and he breathed in and he breathed out. And he was gone. And it was like, oh my God. And I'm like, oh God. Nurse, okay, she came, is he gone? And she's like, yep, he's gone. I'm like, oh, sweetie. And it was, yeah, it was surreal. It was surreal. I was lucky. I got to spend almost 5 hours with his body in that room.
Oh.
And it was...
And he was looking for you,
exactly,
Mitch, to give you that last kiss.
He knew I wanted to be there. We talked about it.
Very beautiful memory.
Yeah, he knew I wanted to be there. He called me in twice. Yeah, I felt lucky. Of all the rotten luck that we'd experienced, that was the stroke of luck that I needed.
Precious.
Yeah, it was. But I remember talking in a GSG the other day about this. It was mentioned about spending time with your loved one's body right after they pass. Yeah, and I'm a strong advocate for that. It was very beautiful and very intimate, but just very beautiful. And it's nice to see them not so desperately sick. Yeah. And it's funny, and I'm quite willing to talk about this. When he died, he literally looked as if he'd been dragged behind a bus. And after about, I don't know, an hour and a half, the nurse came in and she said, excuse me for interrupting, but I just need to lay him out. And I kind of said, oh, is that for rigor mortis? And she went, yeah. And as a yoga teacher, I know a fair bit about anatomy, and I had always assumed that rigor mortis meant your whole body just goes hard, like, muscles and stuff. Everything just hardens up. But turns out it's not. Actually, I learned that day that rigor mortis is your joints, like your elbows, your shoulders, your knees, every spine joint. It's your joints freeze. So the flesh is still soft, but the joints don't move. So if they die like this, you're going to get a hard time because all these joints won't move. So they're going to be stuck like that. So they have to lay them out just so the body's easier to handle. And as soon as she laid him out, and I watched him, I left the room doing it, but she promised me, she reassured me, she said, I did nothing to his face at all. But the change in his face.
Oh, really?
Oh my God.
Really? Isn't that interesting?
He was at peace. He looked happy. He looked handsome. Like, compare that to look like you've been dragged behind a bus. He looked beautiful. And I got to spend time with him. There were flowers in the room. Of course, I put flowers on him. I put my scarf around him. I put my jewelry on him. I took 20,000 photographs. And it was really, really, really special. And yeah, I know it's probably not everyone's cup of tea, but...
Well, I mean, so many parts of this, you can't standardize it, right? No. There will be things that different people need from this experience, but that sounds like such a beautiful moment for you to say goodbye in the way that just felt right for
It really
you.
was, yeah. Yeah. So it was pretty special. Mm.
Gosh,
Yeah.
that's a big story to unpack,
Yeah, it
Mitch.
is. That's our story.
These these experiences, I think, have so much hardship, there's so much that's so painful and so difficult as you go through
Yeah.
it. And I wonder now, 4 years down the track, are there things that you look back on that feel good, feel positive, or things that might have changed you in the right ways? Have you got thoughts on that?
That's a big question. There's a
Yeah,
lot
yeah.
I'm definitely not who I was before. How could I be?
Mm, mm,
It's it's a scary change because you feel like you have no power over it. You feel like you have um, no agency with it. It happens to you. It doesn't happen with you. And that's why I think the first year of grief is probably the scariest. Um, we talk about, at Violet, we talk about this, amongst each other and with our clients, and also on one of the Facebook groups that I've still chosen to be attached to. Get this name. Are you ready? The Pancreatic Cancer Widows Group. Everybody wants to be in that group.
Oh gosh.
I know, it's like
Happy days.
woohoo! But you know what? We all went through this horrendous, ghastly thing. So we all get it. We all speak the language. We know the terrain. So it's unfiltered and it's real and it's really, really supportive. And we talk a lot about there's always people new. The thing that alarms me is there are so many new people always coming in. It's like, oh God, they need to fund this pancreatic thing. But anyway, that's an aside. We talk about the differences in the first year and how terrifying and disorienting the first year is. And I think it just comes down to that classic thing of, we think we have control until we don't. And that first year is completely out of control. Like your grief has control over you in that first year. And it's all about identity and purpose as well. But I didn't feel in control one single bit in that first year. And yeah, it's confronting. And it was confronting. But in hindsight, now that I'm almost at 4 years, I can safely say that the first year, you're still the closest you're going to be to him. They're still close. It's like they're just away. It's like they're coming back. It's like you will get to talk to them again. The clothes still smell like him. His side of the bed still smells like that. You're still shopping for two people. You're still cooking all the things you used to cook together. It's like he's just away. And I don't know, maybe it feels like that. Maybe the gods or whoever they are created it that way so to ease the wretchedness and the enormity of the heartbreak that we're dealing with. Because it's life changing, and the people that haven't been through this don't know that, and how would they know that if they haven't experienced it? I had a friend on my 6-month anniversary of Mark's death, a really good long-term friend, say to me, "Oh, so it's been 6 months, so you must be getting over it now." Like,
Wow.
no.
I mean, you never really get over it. You
No.
you learn to live with it. You learn to kind of manage the big feelings and the grief in different ways over time. But
And thankfully,
there's no chapter that gets you over it.
I know, and thankfully life begins to sprout around it. But
And you kind of reemerge, don't you, in a really different way. I totally
you
agree with that.
do.
It does reshape you.
How can it not
without a doubt.
reshape you? That's the question. How can
Yeah.
it not reshape you? You can't go through something that ridiculously life-changing without it changing your life and changing who you are.
And who you are.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. So that's my Mike story.
And you're taking little parts of all of that wisdom and love and comfort into everyone else that you're supporting in your work with Violet, and that's why we think this needs to
Yeah.
exist.
I think it needs to exist too, and it's interesting when our Violet clients, because some of them know that we've had lived experience, and I kind of like it. I almost always like it when they have the courage to say, "What was your experience? Like, what happened to you?" And they sort of tentatively test the water, and they're probably expecting me to say, "Yeah, yeah, I'm not going to talk about it." I would never tell the whole story like that because it's only going to eat into their time. But it's usually on a specific sort of in a specific question context. But it's nice that it also gives them a really clear idea that, yeah, you have been through this, so you do know this terrain. So I should probably listen to what you've got to say, because I remember when I was them, especially in the first year, I needed to know how I was going to survive this. And I wanted to speak to other people who'd been through this to ask them, what did you do? How did you survive this? Because there are days where I don't know if I will. Yeah.
Which builds trust in the kind of the support that you're providing, but it just gives you some kind of North Star that there's a way forward and a way through on the darkest days.
Right. Yeah. And even the darkest days, they turn into several days sometimes in that first year especially. But yeah, and I also tell my clients, no matter what I've been through, no matter how bad it was, no matter how far out to sea I was drowning and going under, my track record of still landing on the beach is 100%. I'm still here. And no matter how many times it wants to drag me out again, it's less and less now. But that first year, it's crazy.
Oh, yeah.
And it's constant. And it's like it's out to get you. But your track record is still, I made it back to the beach. I had sand in my cosy. My cosy was everywhere. I picked myself up. I walked up the beach going, ugh,
But I got back.
And you wait for you to get sideswiped by another wave, and you go through it again. But it just, I don't know I can't speak for other people, but I learned the patterns of my grief, like going into a grief spiral. I learned a lot about that. I learned about a grief spiral hangover. Like, it's bad enough being in the spiral, that out to sea feeling, and when it finally passes the next day, the exhaustion.
What's the grief spiral? Is it just an absolute wiped out exhaustion?
No, for me, a grief spiral is when you are literally on your knees on the kitchen floor sobbing, and you just, I've also was very happy to learn that crying is our way of regulating when we're dysregulated. And I like to remind people that, because they're like, oh, I shouldn't be crying. It's like, yes, you should. Now's the time you should be crying.
Absolutely should. Feel the feelings.
You're regulating.
And tell me about the grief spiral hangover. What's that look like for you?
It comes with such a giant side of exhaustion. And there's calm. I'm back on the beach again, but I am absolutely wrecked. I could sleep for 16 hours. Yeah, that's what a big grief spiral. And a grief spiral for me could last 2 or 3 days in that first year. You just cannot get it together. You just cannot pull up. Can't pull up. I remember writing in my journal one night, can't pull up. I can't pull up. And it just keeps coming, and you just keep going under. And then finally you get that feeling where it's like, I can see the beach. I'm getting close to the beach. I'm almost there. And then when you finally reach the beach, it's like, oh. And that to me is like the grief spiral hangover. And you just,
I think I know that feeling. It's like when you've had a huge cry,
massive cry, and then
you're in some way kind of emptied, and there's a little bit of comfort in the emptiness, but you are just wiped,
and you know that
there's
you're safe.
Nothing left in the tank.
For me, because I used to teach a lot of concepts of self-care with my yoga work, So I would go into hardcore self-care mode. Like, you need to eat well, you need to do restorative yoga, you need to sleep. These were all my go-tos to sort of give me physical and emotional first aid after a grief spiral. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, you taught me something amazing in that. I've never thought about that, the grief spiral
Oh
hangover.
boy.
I like that concept.
It's worse than a real
I
hangover.
probably drank a bit too much wine in my grief
Oh,
spiraling,
honey,
so I probably had a bit of
didn't
an actual
didn't we
hangover
all?
with the grief spiral.
Oh,
Oh
my
yeah,
goodness.
yeah. I don't know if I've told you this, but I had a really great friend who she said to me, as long as we can close the recycling bin, the lid is neatly
No judgment.
closed,
No judgment.
it's all good. But if there's anything poking out or we can't get that lid on, we're having a conversation.
Okay.
And that didn't last for very long, but gosh, it was very real part of those first few months for me. I
100%.
did drink a lot more wine than I would have
How
normally.
could you not drink more wine? Why would you not want to numb
Yeah,
out?
yeah,
And it's
yeah,
whether it's drinking or smoking pot, or whether it's scrolling for hours and hours and hours on Instagram, or whether it's shopping and buying things because I'm
yeah.
so deprived of
You've got to turn the big
dopamine.
emotions off.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just the
yeah, in
complete
some
lack of
way.
dopamine and pleasure. So yeah, I remember I shopped a lot online and
Did
bought
you?
stuff because I needed that. Oh, yeah. But yeah, I get the overindulging thing, of course. And eating ice cream out of the tub, everybody does that.
Do you know that actually, now that you've said that out loud, I think my version of that was our first Christmas without Maro, when I went absolutely manic
Yep.
crazy, making sure that Christmas was like
Next
the most
level.
perfect
I
thing,
bet.
like the Martha
Of
Stewart of all
course. I
Christmases.
can see
And
why.
I look back on the
Mm,
photos, yeah, but I couldn't see it in the moment. I
no.
just had this big important job to do. And I look back on the photos of that Christmas and I'm like,
Who was
whoa,
that woman?
whoa, that's Christmas on
Who was
hyperdrive.
that woman?
But it was so important to
Yeah,
me. It was
but
it was just part of
but we
that
can both see it now.
coping.
It's you
Yeah,
did
yeah, at the
save
time.
you from this dreadful pain that it was going to feel like if you didn't do that.
Yeah.
Because all the focus would have been for you was Mara's not here.
First Christmas without him.
Yeah, which is
Yeah, yeah.
unbearable. Do you know what I did on my first Christmas without Mark? I went to get a COVID vaccine because that was the only time I could get a booking. And I thought, and all my friends were like, what are you doing for Christmas? And I was like, I'm going to get a COVID vaccine and I'm going to sit on the couch and watch Netflix. I don't care. So I did.
Almost like it's not Christmas, right?
It
I'm
was
just going to pretend
absolutely
it's not
not Christmas for
Christmas.
me. I just,
Yeah,
stocked up
wow.
on, rubbish food and went over to Ashfield, got my vax, and went, okay, at least I did something positive because you know how it was.
I'm definitely going to make this one of the edits, right? Because we're coming into Christmas, and there'll be heaps of people out there navigating their first, so we can give them
Yeah.
the two ends of the extreme version of that first.
I mean,
There's lots of
there's so
firsts.
many. Everyone's got to figure out what works for them with Christmas. Um, yeah, whether there's kids or whether there's no kids, whether you like your family, whether your family understand what you're going through, that's really important too. I remember with as that under that heading, I remember I still to this day when I'm with friends, when we're out to dinner or dining together and the bottle of wine is open and we do that first cheers, and I always still say, here's to absent friends, which is a nod to Mark. And they kind of look at me now like, still? Really? Say, yes, really. He's still dead. So, yes, really. Um, so, yeah, stuff like Christmas, birthdays, the big days, the anniversaries. They're,
The new rituals that you're going to start to develop. Actually, I was at a beautiful wedding on the
mm,
weekend, and the bride's eldest brother, I
mm,
think, had died a few years
mm.
ago. And as they were doing the speeches, they brought around all these little cups that were bright pink, and it was creaming soda and rum, which was
His
his
face.
preferred like little drink. And so we all had a toast to
Oh,
this
that's
brother and
beautiful.
drank his favorite drink, which was like
Kind of gross. Yeah.
wildly revolting. But the right thing to
But at
do.
least he was
Yeah,
there.
gosh.
He had presence.
he was there, and it was a lovely way to
Really lovely
I'll
nod.
certainly remember
That's
it.
a really
Yeah,
lovely
new
nod.
rituals.
Yeah. I went to a memorial wake sort of memorial service of a dear friend who lost her partner, her life partner, and he was a chef. He was a really great chef, and he cooked a great lobster. And she had these beautiful white linen napkins embroidered with little red lobster on one corner of the napkin, and she gave us each a napkin, which was such a beautiful little like every time we use it, it's like, oh, you have to think of Dan. Yeah. Yeah. But just, people get really creative with the way that they honor and remember their person. It's not just a matter of just sticking a box of ashes on the mantelpiece. It's so much more than
And it
that.
doesn't have to be religious, and it doesn't have to
True.
be formal. I
Let's
think,
just be
maybe for the
meaningful.
first time in a long time,
Yeah.
we're breaking free of some of those constraints, and we're actually thinking about what mattered.
Yes.
Who was that person in my
Yeah.
life? What did they love? What did I love about them? And how do we
Exactly.
do something that remembers them in
Yeah.
a really
How
meaningful
do we
way?
carry that on meaningfully? It doesn't have to be traditional or all those things, but just as long as it has meaning, whatever that means. Yeah, I get it. So that's my Mark
Well,
story.
that was a really big and beautiful
Mhm.
conversation.
Thank you.
I hope you've got a bit of space and time after this to just do some of that
I
self-care,
will.
because you won't be feeling a grief spiral hangover, but you might be feeling a bit of that exhaustion. You've just shared a whole
I
lot.
hope it was helpful.
Oh, it's beautiful. I'm sure there's going to be lots of people listening to this that will find so much comfort and wisdom in everything you've
Oh,
shared.
good. That's really good.
And thank you for being part of the Violet family. So
It's my
grateful.
absolute pleasure.
Um, just really, really grateful to have you in that group as we keep going forward and keep growing the good work.